10,500 BC, an agricultural revolution took place along the River Nile, an unusual event insofar as it predates, by 2,000 years, the accepted date when humans discovered how to domesticate animals and plants. The anomaly coincides with an important event in Egyptian history, the arrival from an ocean to the south of a group of gods, following a cataclysm that triggered the last ice age and partially destroyed their island domain. The account, recorded on the walls of the Temple of Edfu, describes how these sages were forced to seek a new home in a land with a more stable climate. In Egypt, they would establish 8 sacred mounds along the river that mirrors the Milky Way. These mounds would become the foundations of the temples we see today. The event was referred to as Zep Tepi, the first occasion. These unusually tall people were called Aku Shemsu Hor, shining ones, followers of Horus. This is the story behind the extraordinary civilization they created, the purpose of the monuments, and how the aim of the entire enterprise was, in their words, nothing less than the rebuilding of the former world of the gods. Visitors to the Giza Plateau in 500 BC describe the 2 largest pyramids still intact, how their polished limestone casing stones shone like beacons in the sun and moonlight. But they also describe them covered with painted hieroglyphs. Even the Arab physician Abdul Latif remarked how these ancient characters are now unintelligible. I never met with a person in all Egypt who understood them. The inscriptions are so numerous that copies of those alone which may be seen upon the surface of the 2 pyramids would occupy above 6,000 pages. Of course, all this changed with the arrival of the Islamic Caliphate, who viewed the ancient monuments not as a precious legacy from a sophisticated civilization, but as a quarry for building a new city across the Nile, Cairo. Even so, what remains of the pyramids today is beyond comprehension. All 4 of Europe's biggest 19th century buildings would have fitted inside the Great Pyramid alone. But who originally dreamed up these monuments? 3,000 years ago, confusing and contradictory stories abounded. Hardly anyone knew for certain when the monuments were built or by whom. Only a consensus that they were erected in prehistoric times and absolutely not as burial places. The idea that pharaohs Khafre, Khufu and Menkaure were responsible for the pyramids of Giza began with an opinion by the Roman historian Pliny the Elder, who claimed pyramids to be the idle and vain ostentation of the wealth of kings. Academic consensus followed that the monuments were built by these pharaohs after 2600 BC, supported by a carbon-14 date taken from mortar between the stone blocks of the Great Pyramid. The problem is, ancient Egyptians used massive blocks of stone so well fitted they required no mortar. Thus, the dating only confirms restoration work carried out during that period. The rest is based on circumstantial evidence and graffiti. The fact is that within a short historical span, even Pharaoh Amenhotep III did not attribute the large pyramids to pharaohs, but to Horus of the horizon, and all the monuments at Giza were known to have formed an essential whole in deep antiquity. Two stelae discovered nearby also imply the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, and other structures were present long before 2600 BC. The Khufu had found an adjacent temple dedicated to Isis in a ruinous state, and how he'd carried out restoration work to this and adjacent monuments built by the gods. To this effect, he proceeded to build a small pyramid for his daughter beside this temple, known as structure G1C, and next to it a pyramid for himself, most likely the small pyramid numbered G1D. And there are 6 of these small pyramids. Egyptologists claim them to be the burial places for wives and daughters of the pharaohs who built the larger pyramids behind them. But if all these structures were built in the same period, then it is odd that the small pyramids are significantly inferior of construction. Even in their dilapidated state, when compared to their larger neighbors, the quality of stonemasonry is notably poor, and the manner in which the blocks have been assembled is comparatively slipshod and lacks the same engineering finesse. Indeed, early Arab historians were well aware that the Great Pyramid itself was built in prehistoric times, when Vega was the de facto pole star. This useful observation provides us with a working range of 12,000 to 10,000 BC, and within this range falls the date of arrival in Egypt of the followers of Horus. If so, then the art of pyramid building was already in decline by the time Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure arrived on the scene to erect their less impressive monuments and carry out restoration work to buildings from an earlier era. We shall look at the pyramids in greater detail in a later episode, because although Giza may be the focal point of the region, to understand what took place there, one needs to examine the monuments in context of the surrounding landscape. "12,000 years ago, Egypt was a very different place, a lush landscape with a rainy climate. Across the Nile, beneath layers of silt and the concrete of modern Cairo, lies the original epicenter of ancient Egyptian civilization. Rising out of the Nile, Yunu was an island representing the mound of creation, one of the 8 established by the followers of Horus upon their arrival by boat from the Indian Ocean. And upon this sacred mound, they erected a rectangular temple dedicated to the creator god, Atum. Today, nothing remains of Yunu except bits of rubble attesting to this having once been the root of temple and spiritual culture, with a fabulous library that became a hub for a unique hieroglyphic system of communication for the study of the stars, and the symbolic architecture whose impact on the imagination remains to this day. Even Plato founded an academy here. Essentially, the followers of Horus instigated a rebirth of practical magic derived from the observation of the laws of nature. In time, the grounds of Yunu came to resemble a forest of obelisks, but the decay of ages deprived it of all but one stone needle. Even its sacred tree fell in the 19th century, like Yunu, overwhelmed by modern sprawl. Just south of Yunu, on the Hill of Thanksgiving in the heart of Cairo's old citadel, sits the Mosque of Ibn Tulum, one of the city's oldest. In the central courtyard, a fountain for cleansing is flanked by a minaret with a spiral staircase for the muezzin to sing the call to prayer. In this mosque, there are 6 prayer niches. The mihrab should point to Mecca, but missed their intended target by 90 miles. Like all European churches built over earlier sacred sites, this mosque appears to conceal a more ancient footprint. From this elevated position in Cairo, it would have been possible to see both Yunu and the Giza Plateau, making it an ideal platform for an ancient surveyor planning to build something impressive across the river. Both sites are exactly 8 miles from today's mosque, so it is likely the two were planned in the same era. When it came to erecting monuments in the ancient world, architects aligned their work to a prominent object in the sky. Such sky-ground referencing established an umbilical cord with a rising sun, moon, or a star or constellation, in order to bestow upon the temple the symbolism or quality and energy with which the celestial body was associated. As such, the process also memorialized the date of construction. With regard to Egypt, the 3 Giza pyramids form a mirror image of the constellation directly associated with the followers of Horus, Orion, when, on the winter solstice of 10,450 BC, they matched the alignment of its 3 belt stars. At the same moment, an observer on the plateau would also have seen Sirius, the star associated with wisdom, rising above the sacred mound Yunu and its academy of ancient knowledge. All of which coincides with that unexplained agricultural revolution in the Nile Valley in 10,500 BC. An enterprise of this scale was clearly beyond the capacity of hunter-gatherers. It is the product of people with a long and proven history in engineering, social planning, and monumental construction, along with skills in astronomy, mathematics, geomancy, masonry, transportation, and organization. Skills requiring hundreds, if not thousands of years of development. Such a civilization profile fits the followers of Horus well. For example, there exists an uncomfortable document called the Turin Papyrus. It's uncomfortable insofar as it lists 9 dynasties of pre-dynastic pharaohs. The oldest, the Venables of Menfed, gods such as Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Set, and Jehuti, whom later Greeks called Thoth, reigned for 23,200 years. They were succeeded by the followers of Horus for 13,420 years, until Pharaoh Mena, who is described as the first of a purely human bloodline, took the throne of Egypt in 3100 BC. That places the start of the Egyptian dynasty in 39,720 BC. Speaking to the Greek scholar Solon during his visit to the academy at Sais around 600 BC, an Egyptian priest explained that, in their time, the Egyptians have seen the course of stars change direction 4 times, experienced the earth rotating backwards, and the sun setting in the part of the sky where it rises today. Twice, to which the priest remarked in jest, "You Greeks are too young. Wait until you've been around as long as we have, and written on the walls of our temples all notable events that have reached our ears." There are other clues pointing to an older age for the pyramids of Giza and their surrounding temples, and they begin at the foot of the plateau. 2 temples form the entrance to Giza. Still visible in front are the remnants of 2 piers, from a time when the Nile was 6 miles closer, surrounding the Valley Temple and turning it into an artificial island, in the process illustrating the creation myth, in which a mound rises out of the waters of chaos and is impregnated with the knowledge of the universe by a creator god. This sacred act forms the foundation of the temple, and it's from this perfect seed this mirror of cosmic perfection, that civilization grows. Two entrances lead to an interior courtyard where masculine pink granite columns rise from the alabaster floor, representing the feminine, the cosmic marriage. Thick architraves once supported the stone roof marked with slits to allow slivers of light to illuminate 23 statues that stood in recesses on the floor. Each honored the 8 primeval gods, along with the 7 ancestor gods and the 8 followers of Horus. The creative principle, Atum, is represented by the temple itself, so that when one enters the building, one enters the body of a living entity. The design, in the shape of a T, represents the breath of God, just as it does in Hopi and Mayan temples. In the dimly lit interior of this stone womb, visitors were reminded of the entities responsible for the first occasion, as well as the root of Egyptian culture. A close look behind the granite facade reveals an inner core composed of massive limestone blocks. They're in an advanced state of erosion, scoured by prolonged periods of rain, and carved by a fast-moving body of water. And yet the region only experienced such a pluvial climate between 10,500 and 7,000 BC, before arid conditions gradually became the norm. By contrast, the granite lining shows hardly any deterioration, not surprising given that it is a harder material, but still one would expect some erosion on par with the inner wall. The interior walls appear to be a much later restoration, including this lone block of diorite that is in pristine condition and stands out amid a sea of red granite. A close look at the exterior indeed reveals that the Valley Temple has been the subject of an ongoing restoration. The larger and older granite slabs are fitted very precisely, while more recent work is less so and required the use of mortar, indicating how subsequent stonemasons lacked the understanding and finesse of their predecessors. The smoothly finished granite outer stones have been pillaged for houses and mosques in Cairo, exposing the extreme erosion. But the temple also shows evidence of having been rebuilt. The monolithic blocks were hit by a colossal force of nature, causing them to be dislodged, then placed back because they've been repositioned upside down and even back to front. There has also been a remodeling. The orientation of a passageway leading uphill and towards the middle pyramid is both awkward and aesthetically at odds with the otherwise harmonious plan of the Valley Temple. A stela found nearby states that the monument was considered extremely ancient even 5,000 years ago in the time of Khufu. It was believed to have been the work of the followers of Horus during the first occasion, when it was known as the House of Osiris. The same extreme water erosion, inconsistent weathering, and obvious replacement of walls is found in the adjacent Temple of the Sphinx, including several limestone monoliths showing little erosion that were placed much later to patch a breach in the original wall. If any polished granite facing existed, it was pillaged a long time ago. Which brings us to the Sphinx itself, or to address it by its real name, Sheshep-Ankh, the eternal image. But eternal image of what? You don't need a degree in art to notice that the head is out of proportion to the body. It is too small. And as far as we know, there was no tradition in ancient Egypt of shrunken heads. Clearly this portion of the limestone outcrop has been recarved, and although Egyptologists adamantly believe Khafre carved the Sphinx in his own image, The angle of profile of the pharaoh's face differs significantly from that on Sheshep-Ankh. A stela found in the nearby temple of Isis clearly states how his father had carried out repairs to the monument then called Hor-em-Akhet, Horus of the horizon. Thus, it cannot be the image of Khufu either. 2,000 years later, Thutmose IV placed a stela between the paws of Sheshep-Ankh. In the accompanying inscription, the pharaoh states how he seated himself under the shadow of this mighty god. So even in his time, the head had yet to be recarved into human form. Nor does the face on the stela itself resemble anything close to the one on the monument above it. We simply do not know whose image it represents. But what is certain is that the missing nose was broken in 1378 in an act of vandalism by the Muslim extremist Muhammad Sa'am al-Dahar, for which he was executed. If early Egyptian scribes are correct in that the Giza monuments formed a complete whole, and that both the pyramids and Yunu mirror the sky on the winter solstice in 10,450 BC, it follows that Sheshep-Ankh too would have been the mirror of a celestial object. And on that date, it gazed directly at the constellation Leo, as it rose level with the horizon. Sheshep-Ankh may have originally have sported the head of a lion after all. What also links Sheshep-Ankh to the adjacent monuments is the enclosure from which it was carved. The walls reveal the telltale signs of extreme amounts of water pouring over the edge and into the enclosure, with the scalloping of the limestone indicating the area was partly underwater for a considerable period. But how did such a volume of water come to descend from the Giza Plateau? When Greek commentators visited Giza in the 5th century BC, Egyptians still recalled how, back in the day, the region was not necessarily served by a river. All the land south of the old capital at Menfed and all the way to the highlands of Ethiopia had once been covered by the sea, as were the desert plains of Arabia. A body of water also existed behind the pyramids. As explained to Herodotus, this sea disappeared from sight in the course of an earthquake, when those parts of it which lay toward the ocean were torn asunder. And the result was the Sahara. All that remains of this inland sea are saltwater lakes at Siwa, 300 miles west of Giza, along with a plain festooned with salt pillars caused by a rapidly flowing body of water. That same body of water could have spilled down the Giza Plateau, eroding the Sphinx and its enclosure, as well as toppling the monolithic slabs of the Valley Temple. Evidence of extreme water erosion coupled with physical destruction of property can also be seen at the base of the three main pyramids. Here, stone blocks have been dramatically shaped by the unmistakable rapid flow of water. The effect is particularly acute in the attendant temples, where most of Egypt's megalithic masonry is on display. Like the Valley Temple, the structure in front of the pyramid attributed to Menkaure shows enormous limestone blocks put back on top of walls, sometimes back to front, and in sections sculpted from below when the site was underwater for a prolonged period of time. Newer blocks were added as part of a later rebuilding project, while the top tiers reveal the effects of prolonged rainfall, the kind that last plagued the region around 7000 BC. It's the same story in the temple in front of the pyramid attributed to Khafre. 3 miles southeast of Giza, there is an even bigger mystery. A massive shaft has been cut out of the bedrock in the shape of a T, with a dual staircase set at the same slope angle as that of the ascending passage inside the Great Pyramid, as though the architect was reading from the same manual. When the shaft at Zayet El Aryan was rediscovered at the end of the 19th century, it was packed with sand and debris. After 3 weeks of digging, the first find, 45 feet down, was of a jumble of massive limestone blocks that appeared to have been dumped into the shaft by a large force. Could this unfinished project have been interrupted by the same wall of water that destroyed the Valley Temple? 20 feet below the accumulated mess lay the pavement. Pink granite blocks laid 4 layers deep in the shape of an L, tightly fitted and imported from a considerable distance. The rest of the pavement was finished with a jigsaw of 40-ton limestone blocks. Protruding from the pavement, an oval lid of pink granite, polished to a mirror-like finish, formed the seal for an oval box beneath, carved in relief from one of the pavement's megalithic blocks. The oval box was sealed, but contained nothing inside. Nothing survives as to the creator or function of the shaft at Zayet El Aryan, only faded photos. Could it have been the foundation for another pyramid? Because a similar construction technique can be found a few miles further south. One of the benefits of escaping the commerce and tourism zoo that is today's Giza is finding yourself in the action-packed peace and quiet of the desert around Meidum. The Pyramid of Meidum was originally called the Beloved of Atum, but unlike the creator god, its longevity has fared poorly. 5 steps of exterior mud brick have dissolved and collapsed, leaving behind the limestone core. Still, its presence is imposing and oddly familiar. Its original proportions are the same as the Great Pyramid of Giza. But unlike Giza, you can have it all to yourself. A steep shaft leads down to a horizontal passage that takes you under the pyramid and into the bedrock, before ascending to a small corbelled chamber that has provided no evidence of burial. Only bats. Its location, 180 degrees due south of Zayet El Aryan, suggests the two were once part of a now forgotten geodetic alignment. Further up at Dashur, there are 2 pyramids in a better state of preservation. But to get there, it is necessary to survive the graduates of the Egyptian school of driving. The Red Pyramid is the 3rd largest in Egypt, and comes with a footprint longer than the Great Pyramids. Its face is decayed to a degree far beyond what is expected for a building allegedly built around 2600 BC, when the local climate was dry. Part of the erosion is the result of prolonged rainfall, which stopped 3,000 years earlier, and part due to the high content of iron oxide, which makes for a more brittle limestone. The building is one large lump of iron. Once the casing stones were removed, the exposed iron oxide began to rust, giving the monument its reddish appearance. Reaching the interior of the pyramid is no easy task. One has to climb a quarter of the way up the face, and then, bent double, crawl backwards down a long shaft. At the bottom, we see the method of apparent madness of the architect. The shaft takes you back to the bedrock where you began the ascent, before reaching 2 chambers. The building literally grew around the chambers that sat on the original desert floor. Aligned north-south, the 2 rooms are skillfully fitted in dark granite. corbelled ceilings of superlative quality rise nearly 50 feet above the floor. The first chamber resonates to a very high pitch and contains at its center a vortex of ascending electromagnetic energy. In the connecting chamber, the pitch is a little lower, so that two people toning in either room will perceive a vibrato effect in the middle. Here, the vortex descends. At the top of the second chamber, a shaft leads to a third, this time angled east-west, whose floor has been destroyed by archaeologists looking for treasure, or a body, or a sarcophagus. In the end, all they found were more bats. But why build one impressive monument when you can build two? Barely a mile away in the middle of the desert is undoubtedly the most enigmatic structure of all, the pyramid with two angles, the so-called bent pyramid. With its casing stones mostly intact, it offers a glimpse of how such monuments once resembled neat geometric forms rising above a verdant landscape. It's jaw-dropping, and it has a presence like no other. As with every other pyramid, its shaft points to true north and towards the pole star. Unlike other pyramids, it features a second shaft located very high up the face and aligned to true west. To access the interior, it is once again necessary to climb some distance up the face and crawl back down an awkward shaft 220 feet in length. The shaft bores back deep into bedrock to reach a platform upon which a formidable chamber was raised. The corbelled ceiling rises 50 feet, and when you reach the top via a modern wooden staircase, you are finally level with the original bedrock outside the pyramid. From here, a rough tunnel was hacked out to connect with the west shaft that leads to a second chamber. And after all this effort, you are finally above the bedrock and inside the actual pyramid. To make sense of this, imagine cutting a large hole out of the bedrock, inside which you built a chamber, followed by another and its horizontal passage on the adjacent bedrock, then encased everything inside a man-made mountain of stone. In this respect, the technique that Zadiat al-Arian shows what the bent pyramid would have looked like in its early stage, leading to the speculation that the site was a pyramid in progress. All this makes for increasingly time-consuming labor, made even more so by the fact that, taken as a whole, all pyramids feature radically different interior configurations. If one design worked, why change the position and height of the chambers? Because none of this would affect the structural integrity of the buildings. What is known is that visitors experience different feelings inside each pyramid. And perhaps that was one purpose behind these structures. Each building was designed to elicit a unique effect on the senses. It's an ongoing puzzle. Another puzzle is the shafts. They are too awkward to be of practical use for people, so to call them entrances is a bit of a stretch. It seems the proper entrances have yet to be found. One solution lies in Central America. In the Maya model, a pyramid is accessed from a subterranean cave representing the womb. A shaft like an umbilical cord leads up into a ritual chamber inside the pyramid that rises to the sky like a masculine phallus. The design is a symbolic representation of the cosmic marriage. Applying this to the bent pyramid takes us to the small auxiliary pyramid beside the south face. It was always known that these two buildings were somehow linked to each other. Excavations in 1947 found nothing inside, but a rough tunnel was discovered leading towards the bent pyramid. Could this feature mark the underground entrance? Still, the two buildings do form a deliberate whole. When seen from above, the structures share a hidden geometric relationship based on a nine-sided nonagon. In esoteric science, it is the form representing utmost perfection. Even the section whether the angle of the slope changes conforms to the hidden geometric model. But what makes the bent pyramid a symbol of utmost perfection? Perhaps the two slopes are the clue. Considered by Egyptologists to be a mistake, the bent pyramid's two unusual angles are in fact ingenious. The cosine of the upper slope equals tangent 36, an integral angle of the pentagram, while the cosine of the lower slope equals tangent 30 degrees, an integral angle of the hexagon. The building effectively expresses the relationship between the pentagram and the hexagram, or in mathematical terms, the ratio 5:6. Half a world away to the east, the same ratio is expressed in the perimeter of the temple complex of Angkor Wat. The name is a corruption of Angkor, meaning Horus lives eternally. Incidentally, the position of temples within Angkor Wat are a sky-ground mirror of the constellation Draco as it appeared in 10,450 BC, the date already commemorated in the monuments around Giza. Further west still, the same ratio is found in the Andes, in the perimeter of one of the oldest temples in the world, Pumapunku. Why is this ratio so prevalent in temple design? If you measure the time it takes the Earth to complete a full circle around its axis, 25,920 years, and the time it takes the equator to complete its tilt, 21,600 years, divide the two, and you get a ratio of 5:6. So the design of the bent pyramid illustrates the motion of the planet upon which it stands. Which brings up an awkward point. One would need to be around for 26,000 years just to observe and measure the phenomenon, making the 36,000-year Egyptian dynasty not so far-fetched after all. But that's not the end of the story. The combination of the pentagram and hexagram is also the foundation of the human body, since the structure of chemical bonds that make up DNA is arranged in these two geometries. Thus, the bent pyramid is both a mirror of the planet and those born there. We are meant to believe the two monuments at Dashur plus the third at Meidum were built by Pharaoh Sneferu as mausoleums. But why would one man with one body require three places in which to bury himself? In the end, he wasn't buried in any of them. This preposterous idea is based on graffiti found on the corners of the pyramids of Dashur. These buildings belong to Sneferu, it says. That much is true, because when Sneferu was ruler, he owned all the buildings in his kingdom. Upon his death, ownership transferred to the next pharaoh, and so on. What is certain is that Sneferu built a simple chapel on the east side of the bent pyramid. And the king's seal is also found in the lower chamber, on stones of rough quality that were used to repair damage probably inflicted by the violent earthquakes that frequently occur on the fault line upon which the pyramids stand. It seems this pharaoh, like others before and after, took pride in restoring and maintaining the houses of the gods that he inherited from a time long before. If we accept that Yunu and the Giza pyramids are terrestrial markers of Sirius and Orion in 10,450 BC, and the Sphinx sees its own image in Leo at the same time, it follows that the two Dashur pyramids occupy the cluster of stars in the constellation Taurus, known as the Hyades, with the red pyramid appropriately marking the giant red star Aldebaran. In which case, the Pyramid of Meidum and its adjacent monuments to the south are the terrestrial reference to the Pleiades. What exists along this region of the Nile is nothing less than an engineered landscape created by ancient architects and astronomers. But to what end? To understand the reasoning behind this superhuman effort, we begin with local tradition. Ancient Egyptians and Arab historians believed the pyramids were built by an antediluvian pharaoh by the name of Saurid ibn Sahuk, following a prophetic vision in which the earth was turned over by falling stars and massive chunks of rock. The account is uncannily similar to the events that led to the end of the Ice Age in 9703 BC and retold the world over. The Egyptians calculated the date as 9600 BC, as did the Maya in Central America, and in both accounts, groups of surviving gods arrived from drowned lands by boat to restart civilization. Saurid assembled 130 astronomers, chief among them being Jehuti, the god of wisdom. They calculated that the event would occur in 300 years and overwhelm the earth with a flood. Jehuti recommended that an unbreakable repository be built, inside which every book related to knowledge, astronomy, geometry, physics, the use of precious stones, even certain types of machinery would be preserved. Saurid agreed and ordered the building of pyramids. Interestingly, the Quran identifies Jehuti as Idris, of whom it says was not a name but a title. Jehuti was its first bearer, who lived before the flood. He wrote many books whose wisdom he preserved on the walls of the Egyptian temples lest it be lost. It was he who constructed the pyramids. In the 9th century, the story reached the ears of Caliph al-Mamun, governor of Cairo, and inspired him to find the building referred to as inventory, where such books and maps had been stored, along with glass that could be folded and metal that did not rust. One reputed location was at Yunu. The other was in the Great Pyramid, for the obvious reason that it was built to withstand tidal waves and earthquakes and meteorites. It's not clear if al-Mamun succeeded, but his effort to break into the sealed pyramid is there to be seen. And soon after, maps showing parts of the world not seen since the flood, including Antarctica free of ice in 22,000 BC, began circulating around the Mediterranean. Is it possible Jehuti constructed another secure vault, one less conspicuous than a pyramid? Eight miles southeast of Giza, the barren panorama looks very much like it did 12,000 years ago after a catastrophe reshaped the landscape. Just beyond the temple complex of Saqqara lies a lone wolf, an anomalous underground vault hacked out of swelling clay and limestone with an uncharacteristic absence of finesse, as though the builders were in a race against time. The Serapeum was excavated by Mariette in 1851. It yielded hundreds of discarded items covering many historical periods, along with statuettes of Apis bulls in niches near the entrance, leading to the assumption that the complex must have served as a mausoleum for sacred bulls. To his credit, Mariette did find several wooden coffins containing a disordered mass of broken bulls' bones, but no mummified carcasses. Even the Frenchman commented on how the burials were about as shoddy as it gets. Inside the tunnels near the entrance, Mariette found two granite boxes resembling standard sarcophagi, believed to have been lodged when the new vaults were added after 1400 BC. Inside an undecorated tunnel, he found a small lavish coffin containing the only human burial, that of Khemweset in 1213 BC, a high priest of Ptah and son of Pharaoh Ramesses II. A totally inappropriate burial for a man of his position. Even common laborers were honored with more dignity in tombs of simple decor. Khemweset was a passionate restorer of monuments already ancient by his time, so perhaps it was his wish to be buried in humility in a vault he himself added. Past the newer sections is the original tunnel, and here things take a sudden turn for the dramatic. Nestled inside each vault rests a basalt or black granite box of preposterous size weighing up to 64 tons. Each box is meticulously cut, although machined would be more accurate. The tolerance is less than 1/100th of an inch, and each 20-ton lid is airtight and watertight. But no mummified bulls were ever found inside them. Only 3 of 24 original boxes are etched with hieroglyphs. One set appears on a precisely engineered block of diorite, one of the hardest rocks on Earth. The marks are crude, rough and uneven, hacked as though with a blunt instrument. Clearly, thousands of years separate the inscriptions from the box, demonstrating how people in later times appropriated and reused items from an earlier age. Even the art of moving massive slabs proved challenging in 530 BC, when Cambyses I attempted to negotiate a smaller box of inferior grey granite in a tunnel, only to get it stuck. What was going on in the original Serapeum? Could this have been the room called inventory? Anyone who's seen the lavish burials in the Valley of the Kings and Queens knows just how the dead were treated on the journey to the afterlife. Those tombs are works of art, with the deeds of the pharaoh and platitudes to the gods depicted with great artistry. In sharp contrast, the hastily carved Serapeum suggests people working against the clock, for whom finesse and decoration were irrelevant. An abandoned lid gives the impression of an impending event about to interrupt the work in progress. The overall impression is of a storage facility protecting a cargo of considerable importance inside watertight boxes. And what could be more important than documents acquired over thousands of years? The problem is, how does one locate an underground repository in a landscape transfigured beyond recognition by a wall of water? Assuming the pyramids of Giza and Dashur were built before the event, they present 2 advantages. Being as tall as skyscrapers, they make excellent landmarks, and their orientation to true north are ideal tools for astronomers and surveyors. The Edfu building texts state that after the flood, the followers of Horus wandered the ocean before making their way back to Egypt. Among them were the builder gods, some of whom were specialists in the art of surveying and astronomy. 50 years after the flood, a surveyor standing on the high ground in front of the middle pyramid at Giza would have looked at the southern sky on the winter solstice and seen the Southern Cross standing upright above the Serapeum, like an X marking the spot. Had he fallen asleep, he would have noted the bright star Anka, the phoenix, rising with its parent constellation above the Serapeum before sunrise. A potent symbol for people who were experts in the use of analogy and metaphor. Meanwhile in the south, a second surveyor standing at the bent pyramid and looking north would have observed the nearest to the pole star, Vega, at 0 degrees above the Serapeum. As dawn approached, busy hands would have cleared the original entrance of mud to find it had been previously aligned to the rising sun on the winter solstice in 9650 BC. If so, the followers of Horus recovered their precious cargo and returned to the ambitious program of rebuilding the former world of the gods. And that involved returning to the 8 original mounds to repair the foundations that, in time, became the temples we see today. One such mound is to be found 700 miles downriver across the ancient city of Waset, later known as Thebes. Like Yunu, Jamet is a place of deep antiquity, with cultural ties to the forces of creation. Today it goes by the name Medinet Habu, a site rarely visited on the west bank of Luxor. It has seen a long history of habitation, yet the focus of attention is the imposing temple of Ramesses III, which is built on a scale far more suited to giants. barely 3,000 years old, the temple encompasses a time of social and economic turmoil, evidenced by the protective wall that turned the once divine environment into a fortress. But there's an absence of mysticism here. The building is a testament to the projection of ego. The sacred art and purpose of the temple has been overtaken by the need to project kingly strength. Thus, in place of philosophical concepts, we find murals depicting the defeat of the pharaoh's enemies. Such late monuments sacrifice geometry and purity for bombast, and a beauty that is comparatively superficial. Political instability led to hieroglyphs being recarved by later rulers taking credit for former glories, or changing the storyline. Consequently, hieroglyphs were hammered 8 inches deep to prevent your story from being erased and rewritten by the next guy. The effect is as brash as it is brutal. Unlike its predecessors, Ramesses' monument also neglects an essential temple protocol: the alignment to a celestial object. As such, it is disconnected from the world of the gods and their magic. It's just a lifeless pile of stone, a larger-than-life building best known for its color frescoes that at least helps us appreciate just how Egyptian temples once looked. A central tenet of Mystery's teachings is not to be fooled by what is big and shiny and beautiful and distracts the eye from things of deeper meaning. And this test is certainly at play in Old Jamet, because the awakened visitor is undistracted by the big monument and is instead attracted to a humble temple beside the entrance. The first indication that something of great value is here is the axis that deviates significantly from that of Ramesses' building and points to something far more ancient along the horizon. On this sacred mound of the followers of Horus, once reached by boat, there have stood consecutive temples dedicated to Amun, the one who conceals himself. The present building has been systematically renovated since 2100 BC by enlightened pharaohs such as Amenhotep I, Hatshepsut, and Thutmose III. It's hard to ignore the feeling of raw power and deep antiquity beneath the feet while observing images honoring the creator god. Ramesses most likely built his monument to associate himself with this humble building and its connection with the lineage of Amun, because Egyptians in his time were still undertaking pilgrimage here, just as their ancestors did in remote antiquity, as though obeying some genetic memory. And probably so, because beneath the foundations are buried the 8 primeval gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt, meaning that their remains would have been brought here by the followers of Horus from the island of ancestors, Iutiti, the domain of the gods they abandoned at the end of the Ice Age. The followers of Horus, who were intimately associated with Orion, memorialized the event by aligning the axis of this temple of Amun with the first appearance of the constellation above the horizon on the winter solstice of 8000 BC. And from here, they would leave their mark along a 700-mile stretch of the terrestrial Milky Way, the River Nile. This remark was made by an Egyptian priest in the temple of Sais to a Greek scholar. He went on to state how, within historical ages and since Egypt became a kingdom, 4 times the sun rose where it now sets, and twice he set where it now rises. "1,500 years later, the Egyptian historian Ibn Abd el-Hakim was still remarking on how so many temples were designed to protect the ancient knowledge of the antediluvian gods. And nowhere is the true age of Egyptian civilization more evident than along the southern part of the Nile. Contrary to belief, the oldest mansions of the gods are found toward Nubia, back in the days when the Nile was once a sea all the way to Ethiopia and accessible from the Indian Ocean. On the island of the Elephant at Aswan, the remains of one such temple stands upon uncountable layers of others. The process has been repeated for so long that the southern end of the island now resembles an artificial hill. It seems everyone sailed here to honor one of the earliest gods, the ram-headed Khnum, protector of the waters that sustain this land. Khnum's assigned duty was the creation of humans, whom he made from clay on a potter's wheel. And since he also molded deities, he was known as a divine potter and lord of things created from himself. A short ride upriver takes you to one of the 8 original sacred mounds, Pa'alek, the island of creation. But if you were expecting a magnificent spectacle, you'd be disappointed. A gate from the Greco-Roman era is the only hint that there once existed a sanctuary of enormous importance here, for the entire site was submerged following the construction of the Aswan Dam. Pa'alek was known as the island of the time of Ra. And given that the reign of Ra took place in 39,000 BC, it makes Pa'alek the oldest site in Egypt. As one building crumbled, so another took its place. Like the act of creation itself, one temple died and another was born. And this perpetual state of regeneration maintained the sanctity of the island for thousands of years. But just as Pa'alek was being consumed by the rising waters of the Nile, a magical feat of engineering led to one of history's boldest rescue operations. The site was transferred, block by block, to a nearby island, where today it is known as Philae. To approach Philae by boat is to experience the sacred mound of the followers of Horus as it once was, an island imitating the pregnant act of creation as it rises out of the waters of chaos. One text describes the original site as an entity that existed before everything else, how it became the first ground of the ancestors upon which the architect of the gods, Ptah, erected the first temple. The great forecourt honors Nectanebo, who restored this and other sites. Phila's present buildings were here long before his time, built as they are on two axes, demonstrating how the temple was periodically adjusted over the course of 4,000 years to compensate for the gradual movement over time of the celestial object to which it was aligned. This island of creation is the domain of the divine bride Ast, Isis to the Greeks. Every winter solstice, a boat containing her effigy was taken to the adjacent island of Bige to consummate her union with Osiris and produce the divinely conceived child Horus on December the 25th. The story is conveyed in the birth house at Phila, where Horus is shown sitting on the lap of the divine bride. The interior of the main temple was once lush with color. In its late stage, it was even adapted into a church by Copts escaping religious persecution. Their altar survives, as do their crosses, along with those carved by the Knights of St. John and the Knights Templar. It seems everyone came to Phila to honor the divine feminine. Phila also became one of the first academies, the starting point for initiates in search of the mysteries, a compendium of moral and spiritual teachings known as the Way of the Gods, which was also introduced into Japan and South America by the gods after the flood. The learning process took between 3 to 10 years. To this effect, the Great Court of Phila served as the academy. It features 32 pillars, and none of its capitals are identical. Before being recarved by later pharaohs, each pillar conveyed in symbolic form a facet of the mysteries that came under the tutelage of the God of Wisdom himself. In time, this set of instructions would form the body of the 33 degrees in Freemasonry. Once the overall lesson was mastered at Palek, the candidate was sent upriver to the next temple, building on a foundation of acquired knowledge, while at the same time soaking up the energy hardwired into every temple in order to raise the electrical current flowing through the body. The aim was to be better prepared for the final phase of initiation, which was conducted at Giza, the domain of Isis's consort, Osiris. In essence, the journey of the initiate mirrored a divine marriage in symbolic form. Upriver from Palek comes the next place of learning, Kom Ombo. Listed in the building text as a primordial mound, the present temple stands on thousands of years of former buildings that elevated the current site 40 feet above the Nile. After it fell into disuse, Kom Ombo was nearly overwhelmed by the debris of a town that grew within and around it. Among those honored here is the architect of the universe, Ptah, the one who shapes the words of Jehuti, the god of wisdom, into physical form. Isis also finds her place here. as does one pharaoh who is showered with the knowledge of the gods by Jehuti and Horus, by which the lucky chap attains everlasting life. Not a bad use of one's time on earth. Kom Ombu's primary function in the path of initiation lies in its double entrance, a rare example in a temple. The left corridor is dedicated to the teachings and qualities of Heruor, Horus the Elder, the hero of daytime and the qualities of the higher self. The right corridor belongs to his complementary opposite, the crocodile god Sobek, the shadow self who dwells in the night hours. Depending on the entrance one felt attracted to, the initiate would work on all aspects of the light or shadow of personality, harmonize the two, and restored balance within. Essentially, Kom Ombu was the place where you mastered the art of duality. And to achieve this, you needed to conquer fear. Egyptians dramatized the spiritual concept with a passion play, where Horus was devoured after sunset by Sobek. However, as sunrise approached, Sobek was responsible for the rebirth of Horus, thus ensuring their mutual survival. Because without death, there is no rebirth, there is no death. And for this reason, the crocodile was both feared and revered. All this took place inside an enclosed series of chambers. At the end of each passage stands a highly magnetic altar stone. One is angled to project the magnetic field upward, the other downward, creating a loop. At this point in the proceedings, initiates who'd mastered duality were tested by being led into a lower chamber in which they had to prove their control of fear, which they did by swimming with the crocodile and pinning an earring to its ear. And just to prove the priest had a sense of humor, they admitted to tell the candidates they'd given the reptile a sedative to buy them enough time to complete the task. The teaching of the two doors, also known as the Book of Gates, was practiced half a world away, in the older section of Machu Picchu. Inside a cleft cut into the rock stand two false doors that lead nowhere. Coincidentally, the angle of the stone above this chamber is identical to that used for the entrance into the Great Pyramid of Giza. In Greek times, the two gates became the doors of truth and falsehood, an important component in the mystery school of Zeno, which the Greek philosopher learned while studying in Egypt. The path of initiation continued downriver to one of two original prehistoric mounds of Horus. Little remains of Nekhen but rubble. However, the second red mound survives 9 miles away. It is one of the most dramatic sights in Egypt, the Temple of Edfu. Representing the Shining Ones, followers of Horus, Edfu is the home of the hawk god Horus, the one who overcomes the challenges posed by a journey to the other world to emerge purified and spiritualized. A self-made solar hero. With its face to the equator, Edfu is designed to stoke the inner fire that gives strength to complete the journey of life. Ancient Egyptians stated how a temple is not a fully sacred space until it stands upon the foundations of 12 earlier sites. Edfu fulfills that requirement, resting as it does upon multiple foundations covered by thousands of years of Nile silt, while incorporating elements from earlier buildings in the fabric of the structure we see today. Embracing this remote antiquity, the axis of Edfu marks Orion in its mid-heaven position on the summer solstice in 10,500 BC. At a stroke, it acknowledges the constellation associated with the followers of Horus, as well as the highest position of light, the mark of the solar hero, and the triumph of wisdom over ignorance. But above all, the date coincides with that anomalous agricultural revolution on the Nile. Still, Edfu did not escape the decay that comes with the mortal world. A mud brick village sprouted inside the compound. 30 feet of accumulated rubbish and sand raised the rubble up to its ceiling, nearly overwhelming the site. French visitors in the 18th century described villagers living on the roof and discarding garbage, a sight that led the novelist Gustave Flaubert to remark, "The village is situated around the enormous temple and climbs up part of it. The temple serves as a public lavatory for the whole village." Towards the end of the 19th century, the site was finally cleared of debris. To access the interior, French archaeologists had to be lowered through a hole in the roof and dig their way through 1,000 years of sewage and household waste. The English writer Amelia Edwards describes the transformation. Now standing free in a deep open space, like a risen god issuing from a grave, the huge building stands before us in the sunshine, erect and perfect. The effect at first sight is overwhelming. Who enters that gate crosses the threshold of the past and leaves 2,000 years behind him. Edfu was restored by Greek pharaohs, with images of Ptolemy III dominating its facade. But this is only half the story. Appropriating other people's buildings was commonplace. For example, at Abu Sir, there is a graffito written thousands of years earlier than the building later claimed by Pharaoh Sabura. Still, there is some truth to this. Under Alexander the Great, the Greeks found Edfu in tatters and proceeded to restore it. Ironically, the build-up of waste after their departure helped preserve their hard work. The imposing entrance leads to a central court. Just as in Phila, it is framed by 32 columns once covered in secret teachings, transforming the initiate as a 33rd degree as they entered the body of a god given visible shape in stone. The temple also served as a reminder to the pilgrim of the importance of honoring the physical gods who brought civilization to the land, as well as the gods in spirit form who are intertwined with and regulate the proper flow of nature. Thus, in the first hall, 12 columns represent the hours of daylight and the qualities of the gods assigned to each. A kiosk served as a library. A kind of card index listing available books is marked on the wall. It seems Plato is late returning his copy. Accounting for inflation, that'll cost him. The following hall, by contrast, is devoted to the 12 hours of night and their assigned gods. The stone still bears the scars of creosote from the campfires of villagers who lived here. At the core of the temple, the sanctuary stands alone. It is both the mound of creation as well as the original island domicile of Horus himself. The walls outline the qualities of this god. As a metaphor, the falcon hovers above the earth. It is no longer limited to what is near, but sees beyond cause and effect to take in the big picture and its limitless horizon. At the rear stands an imposing altar shaped from a single block of syenite and polished to perfection. It once contained a gold statue of the god. But the focal point is the solar bark of Horus. It once housed stone tablets inscribed with the deeds and qualities of the solar hero, whose conduct set the tone for moral and civic order. In essence, this receptacle is a precursor to the Ark of the Covenant. A serpent curves along the mask of Horus, indicating the use of life force to amplify and sustain the spiritual force. Each year, the bark was navigated downriver to Luxor for a festival marking the union with Horus's consort, Hathor, whose own bark arrived from Dendera in celebration of the abundance of the land. During restoration work, Greek scholars came across something of far greater value among the rubble of Edfu: the building texts. The building texts describe a remote period in prehistoric times called the Early Primeval Age of the Gods, in which the ancestors of the Egyptians arrived from the island of fire that lay amid a great ocean to the south, where the earliest mansions of the gods were founded. This sacred domain was the abode of the followers of Horus, and on occasion the gods would take a lucky human there to see it. The Edfu building texts state that during this period there existed two races: hunter-gatherers with little knowledge of civilization, and an altogether different race of people who lived remotely, far more advanced in engineering, metallurgy, astronomy, large-scale architecture, natural magic, civic cohesion, and navigation. When a swarm of meteorites caused havoc across the globe and ushered the Ice Age in 10,800 BC, it forced a group of sages to search for a potential new home to set up the sacred mounds upon which the future temples would be built. Within 300 years, the group of male and female gods established themselves along the Nile, governing from Yunu and other satellite temples, and Edfu was one of them. But soon this golden age of creation was overrun by a second catastrophe. A meteorite and a flood destroyed the island of fire. The calamity is described as the great leaping snake pierced the domain of the gods. The majority of its divine inhabitants drowned. Companies of gods lucky enough to be at sea survived. Led by Horus and Jehuti, the seven sages and builder gods reluctantly wandered the world as the crew of the Falcon before arriving in southern Egypt, in their words, to resurrect the former world of the gods. The decision to rebuild here was due to its geographical advantage in a period marked by extreme cold and the absence of sunlight. Close to the equator, conditions were warmer and humid, and the extra rainfall benefited the region as an ideal place for the regeneration of new forms of life. Described as very tall, elegant, and possessing supernatural powers, the followers of Horus were experts in their field. They constructed sacred architecture according to what the sages of the primeval age revealed to Jehuti. They possessed the ability to foretell the future, endue with power the substances on earth, to magnify things, and provide magical protection by means of symbols and the giving of names. This dynasty of semi-divine beings governed Egypt until they found humans with integrity who were capable of leading by example, at which point the followers of Horus lived in the shadows. To read the Walls of Edfu is to dive into a lost history of the human race, a time when we walked side by side in mutual respect with gods. And yet the building texts are scattered from wall to pillar, indicating they are part of a broader account recovered in fragments by Greek renovators who carved the information on every available space, lest it be lost. After all, the texts state how they comprise nothing less than the words of the sages, the only divine beings who knew how the temples and sacred places were created. Indeed, one distinguishing characteristic of all the flood gods was their knowledge of the laws of nature and how to bend them. Demonstrating the point, along the inner perimeter there is a recipe for transforming an ordinary piece of land into a portal. The manipulation of the subtle forces of nature occurs at Edfu itself. The Earth's telluric currents flow across the planet in many forms. One covers the surface like a net. Known as the Hartmann grid, this rectangular membrane stretches around the perimeter of Edfu, as though establishing a protective force field for the sacred mound. The bloodline of the followers of Horus was maintained for 6,000 years after the flood, until Mena, who rose to the throne in 3200 BC, who is described as the first pharaoh of a purely human bloodline. Still, by 1500 BC, their progeny occasionally found their place on the throne, such as Hatshepsut, the queen depicted with the beard, but not because she was pretending to be a man. The ceremonial beard identifies the ruler as the wisdom keeper, while acknowledging their divine lineage, although the symbol was often misused by anyone claiming instant godliness by association. Hatshepsut left a few clues about her special lineage. For starters, she rebuilt the temple of Amun at Jamet, where the original creator gods are buried. Then, in her own temple, a delicate set of frescoes depict her alleged voyage to a land called Punt, a nickname given to the island from which the followers of Horus originated. However, this journey would have been impossible in the queen's time, because the island of the gods is said to have been overwhelmed by a falling meteor and rising seas long before her time. The account is retold in Papyrus 1118 by a sailor who was shipwrecked there and met one of the surviving gods shortly before it vanished beneath the waves. Like the sailor, Hatshepsut's journey takes her into the Indian Ocean to a land of beehive huts, special trees, precious goods, and incense. It may have been her subtle way of advertising her connection to the bloodline, especially as the next mural describes the divine principle incarnating in mankind, whose earthly representative is Hatshepsut. The Queen's Temple appears deceptively simple, but is in fact full of surprises. In contrast with the funerary function of the adjacent valleys of the kings and queens, her temple stands out in its dedication to fertility. Partly integrated into the cliff face and partly inside it, it expresses an act of impregnation. The effect is dramatized by directing the axis of the temple to the rising winter solstice sun, so that the first shaft of light is conducted along a series of ramps into an altar at the top. Before the desert took over, the approach to the temple was made along an avenue of sphinx, reflective pools, and flower beds. Rows of 11 columns define this as a solar temple, 11 years being the sunspot cycle. 3 ascending levels symbolize the trinity of creation and the spiritual aspiration of the individual. With its rigidity and absence of adornment, the design projects strength and masculinity. It is sober, symbolic, and commanding. Hatshepsut's architect, Semnut, who is buried on the side of the hill, wrought a masterpiece of elegance, harmony, and proportion out of a rough wall of rock. His exercise in geomancy influenced architects for centuries, particularly Albert Speer in Germany during the 1930s, and the style of Art Deco. At the head of each ramp stands a protective falcon, who is artfully integrated into the balustrade as 2 intertwined serpents, indicating the flow of electromagnetic current as it rises towards the core of the temple. At the top, the beam of sunrise is focused through a series of narrow doorways, each carved in contrasting granite, the stone symbolizing the solar masculine principle, before piercing the chapel of Amun inside the womb of the cliff and illuminating the statue of this creator god. On the middle level lies the chapel of Hathor, the house of Horus. Here Hatshepsut pays homage to the goddess Hathor in the form of a cow, emphasizing one of her roles as provider of nourishment in the physical as well as spiritual sense. The chapel also pays tribute to the ancient festival of Athir, which remembers the great flood generated by the torrid meteor shower in the month of November, and the survivors, which included the followers of Horus. Complementing this at the opposite end is a rare chapel dedicated to Anubis, which sits beneath a painted canopy of stars. Anubis is the opener of the way, the black dog who uses his homing instinct and the ability to see in the dark of the other world while the departed soul acclimates to its new and confusing environment. The decor is delicate and painstakingly shaped in relief out of limestone. The queen is pictured making offerings to Horus, the god of rebirth, while Amun watches over the proceedings. Hatshepsut wasn't the only ruler who followed in the footsteps of the gods in the hope of ensuring their genius for generations to come. A 4-hour drive through the desert leads to a place that was already a focal point of veneration by 5400 BC. Abju, what Greeks would later call Abydos. Rumor had it that Osiris himself was buried somewhere in the surrounding hills, creating a rush by many early kings to build monuments and mortuary temples here. 4,000 years later, it was the turn of Seti I, when he added his own masterpiece 50 feet above the original level of the Nile, which itself is now 7 miles away. Earthquakes, war, and general pillaging cost the building its main entrance and courtyard. leaving an open space and the blocking of 6 of its 7 corridors. The modern restoration is nothing short of miraculous. Seti was a student of the mysteries teachings, and he made sure the visitor knew this when approaching his temple. Each staircase is accurately reconstructed with 42 steps, each one representing the assessors in the other world who will remind you of your deeds and misdeeds during your incarnation on earth. In sharp contrast with his spiritual sensitivity, Seti's son, Ramesses II, redecorated his father's grand enterprise by recarving the facade with images of himself and his conquests. And once he'd started, he kept going. Every inch of the first hall was similarly recarved with images of Ramesses showering the gods with offerings and being glorified by them in return. It may seem like an exercise in narcissism, but to his credit, Ramesses spent much of his life removing invaders from Egypt, or engaging in war with its enemies, or dealing with the bankrupt treasury. What few minutes of the day remained were usefully spent procreating. Ramesses boasted no less than 103 children. Clearly, stamina was not an issue for this larger-than-life character. Fortunately, the remainder of the temple remains as his father intended. The modern restoration has slowly uncovered its secrets out of layers of creosote deposited by villagers who later turned the site into an apartment complex. The panels follow Seti's spiritual development through his understanding of the knowledge of the gods. And having applied it in his words and deeds, he was reborn, just like the god Horus. As the gods themselves once declared, to follow their example is to achieve immortality. But Seti's vision went beyond leaving a record of his journey into enlightenment. 7 corridors lead to 7 individual sanctuaries. As one inches towards them, the floor rises to bring the seeker ever closer to the domain of the gods. Each sanctuary is dedicated to the life and attributes of a specific deity. By meditating on these qualities, the seeker identified patterns of behavior in need of finessing or addressing, and by implementing new ideas in their daily habits, they gradually improve towards the desired aim of spiritual perfection. In essence, Seti established a vehicle for self-development. The first sanctuary is dedicated to Horus, followed by his mother, Isis. Osiris completes this trinity and is given 6 rooms. The name Osiris is a Greek transliteration. His original name was Asar, from which derives the title Vizier, and later Wizard. One panel depicts the passage of Osiris into the otherworld aboard a solar boat. while overhead his cartouche carries his name across the starry sky and into eternity. In one striking scene, he is administering to the Djed pillar with his consort Isis. The Djed is said to represent the stability of life, so it is interesting that it should be inclined at 22 degrees, the minimum angle of tilt of the Earth, whose movement generates the seasons and allows the planet to sustain life. All forms and functions of this god are represented here, along with ceremonies related to his journey into the underworld and his subsequent resurrection. The next chapel focuses on the qualities of Amun-Ra, in which the knowledge of the creator god is transmitted to Seti by the use of a kamsa, a hand gesture aimed at the third eye, creating a bridge from one being to another. Seti declares he has a clear conscience when applying this restricted information, which he will protect at all costs. Throughout his initiatory journey, Seti is shown making offerings to Isis, who in turn nurtures him with her wisdom by breastfeeding the pharaoh. And in turn, a young Seti takes his position on her lap as Horus, the child reborn through divine knowledge. In the chapel of Ra-Horati, the candidate seeks illumination during the daylight hours as he follows the path of the rising sun towards sunset. Finding himself in a state of balance, the candidate is now in a position to manifest on the physical plane. And for this to occur, there's no better teacher than the great architect himself, Ptah. At the height of his accomplishment, Seti is given his own chapel, in which he is honored by Jehuti for using his wisdom wisely, and by Seshat, goddess of sacred buildings, who writes his name into immortality for constructing a temple according to the protocol set down by the followers of Horus. Or did he? By far the most potent room is the Holy of Holies. There is a powerful yet humbling presence here, the combination of earth energy and 1,000 years of accumulated devotion. The problem is, the room is located in the wrong part of the building. According to protocol, the temple ought to represent a bodily form from feet to the head. Technically, the Holy of Holies should extend beyond the Osiris room, but it doesn't. Seti abruptly changed the axis of the temple and the building took on the shape of an L, a total violation of protocol. Seti was an astute student of temple culture. Only an unforeseen structural issue would have forced such a radical departure from normal. The answer to his apparent madness lies beyond the rear wall of the Osiris chapel. The area behind Seti's temple looks much like it did a century ago when the depression in the sand inspired a large digging operation. As the debris was removed, it revealed a building so out of place that people wondered what it was doing there. The Osirian is categorically different from anything in ancient Egypt. At first glance, it appears to be an underground temple. But close inspection reveals a building overwhelmed by silt deposited during a long period of intense flooding and rainfall, a period that lasted up to 7000 BC. This alone makes the Osirian 9,000 years old. In contrast to Seti's ornate temple, it is stark and minimalist, constructed with the biggest blocks of stone in Egypt. At 100 tons apiece, one wonders how early navigators were able to ship them 300 miles from the quarry at Aswan. Visually, the Assyrians' closest relative is the Valley Temple at Giza. And like the Valley Temple, it too was accessed by boat and encircled by the waters of the Nile. The Osirian is named for Osiris, although this was an invention by archaeologists. There is no sign the god was buried here. And although many pharaohs came to Abydos to honor him, by 3500 BC, none of their monuments related to the Osirian, as though it was already lost beneath the silt and the sand. When it was finally excavated, the formidable architraves that once formed the ceiling were found cracked and collapsed, as though an enormous weight compromised the integrity of the building. It is possible that Seti rediscovered the by then underground structure and built his new temple above it, because both buildings share the same axis. But the weight of his temple placed an impossible burden on the compromised stone below, collapsing it and forcing Seti to alter his plan. Because Seti's Holy of Holies ought to be right above the Osirian. Seti carved a handful of hieroglyphs to tell us he was here, yet judging by the advanced megalithic architecture, he was certainly not the builder. Case in point, the ceremonial tunnel Seti attached to the rear of the Osirian is made of crude mud brick. At the end of the tunnel are two important texts, the Book of Gates and the Book of What Is in the Amduat, an orientation map of the other world and what the initiate should expect to see there. A bas-relief features the titles of its gatekeeper, Osiris. This is carved from inferior limestone blocks which pale in quality as one enters the Osirian. The heart of the Osirian is a massive sandstone platform surrounded by an 18-foot deep moat fed by an underground spring, giving the platform the appearance of an island, the primordial mound of creation rising out of the waters of chaos. Two sets of steps are carved at each end, providing places to disembark. There are two recesses in the center, a square representing the physical world, and a rectangle in the proportion of the golden ratio, the mathematical progression at the core of plants, shells, and animals. As if continuing the theme of creation, 5 flower of life diagrams, painted with a mixture of egg yolk, dissolved limestone, and red ochre, appear on the inner face of one monolith. Their awkward position near the top suggests they were added much later, possibly by the Greeks, when the site was still partly exposed but covered with rubble. What is the building trying to say? The surrounding wall of sandstone blocks contains 17 side chambers. This unique number is found in some of the oldest temples on the planet, all of which are associated with teachings introduced by antediluvian gods and sages who followed in their footsteps. Called the Way of the Gods, it is found in other 17 chamber sites such as Kenko in Peru and Nauf in Ireland. If so, then the 17 teachings of the gods surround this island of creation, whose 10 massive granite pillars prop up the sky. The teachings are the means of connecting to the heavenly world of the gods. The Osirian, it seems, is nothing less than an umbilical cord linking the material world to the supernatural. Beyond what was originally the entrance looking out to the Nile, Seti added another corridor made of limestone. Its gabled ceiling features the Book of Nut, in which the sky goddess is supported by Shu, the god of air. Its astronomical text outlines the interrelationship between the realm of earth and sky, overseen by Shu. On the opposite ceiling is a description of the hours of day and night, its associated gods, and the interrelationship with the other world. The Osirian is a great teaching device, depicting in graphic form the very act of creation when the knowledge of a god impregnated the original mound which rose above the waters of chaos. And inside its chambers were taught the rules of nature and how a mortal person can learn to bend them, just as ancient Egyptians once said of the gods themselves. But the act of creation requires two individuals, so perhaps we should be looking less at Osiris and more at his consort Isis. And to this effect, Seti cunningly left a clue in the corner of the very last room of his own temple. The Hall of Seker describes the rebirth of Seti with the help of the god attributed with this function. The falcon-headed god is shown standing at the foot of a bier, while Isis, in the form of a kite hawk, hovers above a horizontal Seti. As the kite hawk of Osiris, Isis demonstrates her ability to fan the breath of immortality into those entrusted to her. For this to occur, the soul of the hero must travel to the region of regeneration, the pole star, which is protected by 7 Aku, the 7 circumpolar stars that rotate around it but never set. Like the soul, they are the indestructibles. And the star Deneb in the constellation of Cygnus is one of them. But long before Cygnus was depicted as a swan, it took on the form of a kite hawk. If the constellation could be associated with the Osirian, we may yet discover its true age. When Seti built his temple, he violated a second protocol. It fails to align with any celestial object. It does, however, share the same unusual 36-degree axis with the Osirian. Rolling back the sky, a person looking out the original entrance of the Osirian at the time of its inauguration would have experienced a sight both magical and theatrical on the winter solstice, as Cygnus rose in union along a vertical river of stars, the Milky Way, with its bright star, the indestructible Deneb, appearing through the doorway in 10,500 BC. It seems Seti wasn't so much concerned with his own accomplishment as he was with resurrecting a temple built by the followers of Horus to transmit their knowledge to those who would come searching for it thousands of years in the future. Any culture with an incredibly long lifespan inevitably gathers a vast amount of experience on the nature of life and the universe, not to mention an understanding of the mechanics of the other world, how to get there, and how to find your way back. As we shall see, the followers of Horus made it look effortless. The land of Waset lies in the center of Egypt and contains 85% of its monuments. Among them are Karnak and Luxor, as well as Chamet, where 8 of the original gods are buried. Many more remain hidden under sand or silt, awaiting their turn to be resurrected. It's a similar situation as far as people are concerned. Much of their potential lies dormant until something awakens within that transforms them into the man or woman they were born to be. Like most esoteric cultures, Egyptians regarded the incarnation of the soul into the body as a spiritual death, and they went to great lengths to remedy the situation. The land to the west of the Nile marks the sun's descent into the otherworld. Above this arid landscape rises the pyramid-shaped mountain Dehenet, abode of the goddess Meret Seged, she who loves silence. And in 2 valleys below, many kings and queens found this epitaph to be true when they were laid to rest. Unlike pyramids, the valleys of the kings and queens are the places to find buried royalty. The tombs are richly decorated with their owners' life achievements, associations with protective gods, and details of their journey into the Amduat, the Egyptian otherworld. But at the extreme end of the Valley of the Kings, one tomb deviates from the rest. Set in a narrow crevasse 80 feet above the desert floor, the alleged resting place of Thutmose III was found sealed along with its sarcophagus. When it was opened, there was nobody inside. Nor would there have been, because Thutmose was buried on the other side of the mountain in the mortuary temple beside that of his stepmother, Hatshepsut. So what on earth is going on here? To Egyptians, a tomb was a place of rest, but not necessarily a final resting place. In much the same manner, experiencing the Amduat did not require a person to be dead. On the contrary, evidence shows that after undergoing an initiation ritual inside a restricted chamber, candidates were roused several days later from a womb-like experience and proclaimed awoken or risen. Thutmose's monument is different in every sense. It features a well, a redundant feature for a dead person. The first chamber forms the bridge into the Amduat. Despite Thutmose's extraordinary accomplishments, none of them are listed. Instead, the room displays the Book of the Hidden Chamber, a complete set of 741 protective deities, spells and incantations necessary for the initiate to access the Amduat and maintain focus to ensure his return. The Amduat was as real to Egyptians as the physical world. But unlike the physical world, this parallel place exists outside of time. It is present and eternal and simultaneous with the physical. It interpenetrates the world of the living, a place from where all physical forms manifest and to where they return. It is an integral component of birth, death, and rebirth. The book claims that only through a direct experience of the Amduat can one fully grasp the operative forces of nature, the knowledge of which is said to transform a person into an ark, a being radiant with inner spiritual illumination. Because the physical body operates at a very dense vibration, the process also involved techniques to guide more penetrating frequencies, slowly raising the body's vibration and preparing it for the ultimate out-of-body experience, from which the individual was expected to return and live a fully active life. And Thutmose III did exactly that. The lower chamber is also shaped unlike a regular burial chamber. It is in the elongated shape of a cartouche, symbolizing eternity. The sarcophagus is a scale version of the room. And whereas the west is the ritual orientation for the dead, this room is aligned northeast, symbolic of the quest for knowledge and wisdom. Whoever lay here did not come looking for death. They came in search of illumination. The Book of the Hidden Chamber rolls out like a papyrus around the room. Although painted in a simplistic and uncharacteristic style for a ruler of this magnitude, it is expertly executed, providing a highly descriptive account of the journey of the initiate aboard a solar boat across the Milky Way, the obstacles and challenges facing the soul as it navigates the unusual landscape, and the assistance it will receive to reach its intended destination. However, the text claims the experience is not intended for a dead person, but one who is alive. It is good for the dead to have this knowledge, but also for the person on earth. Whoever understands these mysterious images is a well-provided light being. Always this person can enter and leave the Amduat, always speaking to the living ones, proven to be true 1,000,000 times. Clearly, Thutmose and perhaps others used the chamber to access the shadow world and return with specialized information, which was then practically applied in daily life. And yet the ritual was not limited to people of high rank. One account of a spirit door belonging to a servant in the household of Pharaoh Teti I describes how he was favored to join a privileged inner circle via a secret ritual to master secret things of the Pharaoh. The humble man states, "Today, in the presence of Teti, son of Ra, more honored by the Pharaoh than any servant, master of secret things, when His Majesty favored me, he caused that I enter the chamber of restricted access." And upon returning from his experience, the grateful servant joyfully proclaims, "I found the way." But the big question is, if this ritual had been performed 1,000,000 times, just how far back does the tradition go? Was this another of the pieces of temple protocol introduced by the Aku Shemsuhor, the Shining Ones, followers of Horus? Illumination may have inspired the creation of a sprawling complex on the east side of the Nile by the name of Karnak. Karnak expanded like a living entity from a seed into a rambling metropolis where anybody who was anyone left a shrine, a pillar, an obelisk, even an entire temple. Karnak is creation in a permanent state of creation. The name translates as stone sanctuary of the illuminated being. "30 feet of silt and accumulated rubble beneath the present buildings make it impossible to date. However, its only surviving megalithic structure, ostensibly the oldest, is a sun shrine along the main axis, which would have aligned to the winter solstice and the minor lunar standstill around 4400 BC, just as the age of Taurus was reaching its climax. The simple yet robust shrine appears to have been rededicated and reused 3,000 years later by our old friend Thutmose III. But the founding of Karnak may lie deeper still in antiquity. Its most ruined section falls under the protection of the original prehistoric god Montu, ostensibly making it the oldest. Montu is the universe defined, the creative principle manifested as time and space. Such a fundamental understanding of how life evolves would have been a staple teaching of the Aku Shemsu Hod. Coincidentally, the general alignment of Montu's precinct is similar to that between the temple of Edfu and Orion. The movement from one age to the next brings new ideals. The old causeway into Karnak is lined with an avenue of rams, marking the passage into the age of Aries. Around this time, Montu's position was superseded by three gods defining the eternal cycle of creation: Amun, his consort Mut, and their divine child Khonsu. A shrine of dedication to this trinity marks the entrance, illustrating how the cult of Amun not only dominated this epoch, it even led to the rewriting of earlier narratives. For example, near the destroyed chapel of Tutankhamun, a pillar celebrating the coronation of Seti I shows the pharaoh honoring Amun on the right, except Amun's image is set deeper into the stone. The pillar has been recarved. Tutankhamun himself did not escape the purge. He was forced to change his original name, Tutankhaten. Never one to be outshone, Ramesses II enlarged the Great Court to make way for 2 rows of statues of himself, of which only 3 remain. At least he was thoughtful enough to add an effigy of his wife, even if a small one. A vast field of debris surrounds Karnak. It is an invitation to study the art of the stonemason. The fine detail on a basket or the skin of a serpent can be appreciated now they're no longer on a lintel 30 feet above the ground. Here we find pharaohs being granted everlasting life, and kings honored by the divine bride. One building stands out among the rubble. The small chapel of Senusret I looks harmonious and perfect from every angle. And no wonder. The proportions of this delicate gem are based on the harmonics of the earth, moon and sky. 2 platforms incorporate the sacred and royal cubit, the most accurate units of measure derived from the measurement of the earth. It was still so until NASA superseded them using data from a satellite. Doors and windows are based on the mathematical proportions of musical notes, such as the octave and the perfect fifth, as well as the golden ratio, nature's very own mathematical progression. The chapel is essentially a guidebook of geodetic and sonic information. Earthquakes, warfare, and general pillaging reduced a courtyard once bristling with obelisks to 2. Hatshepsut is not just the tallest ever erected, it is also carved with industrial precision from a single block of red granite, one of the hardest rocks on Earth. 3,500 years later, it's still in perfect condition. The transportation of such massive needles once taxed the extremes of Victorian engineering, yet Egyptians moved them seemingly without effort 150 miles upriver from Aswan. No obelisk is the same. Each has its own angle, and when placed in pairs, the height difference turned them into sundials by measuring the difference in the shadow cast by the sun. By virtue of their geometry, length, and pitch, they make perfect resonators. One fallen obelisk still hums when struck. Like tuning forks, they set the tone at the entrance to a temple, acting as a kind of force field, especially when placed above the flow of the Earth's electromagnetic currents. This energy was stored by the quartz in the stone, generating a piezoelectric effect that rose to the tip, which was stamped with a sheet of electrum, a highly conductive metal made from a recipe of 2/3 pure gold to 1/3 pure silver. At the core of Karnak is the sacred lake, representing the primordial ocean. The proportions conform to the golden ratio. Just as crocodiles once resided at Komombo, so Karnak was home to hippopotami, the material form of the goddess of fertility, Taweret. The lake was used for purification ceremonies. But by far the most overwhelming feature in Karnak is the hippo-style hall. Of 134 massive columns, neatly arranged in 16 rows, 122 feature closed papyrus reeds. They converge on a central row of 12 taller columns with open buds, symbolizing the total unfolding. The hippo-style hall is a graphic depiction of vegetal life emerging from the primal swamp. It is the act of creation, the unfolding of the mechanics of life. Like wandering through a field of reeds, the effect is bewitching. As with the Osirian at Abydos, the huge hall was once enclosed. But whereas the knowledge of the gods was committed to memory at Abydos, in Karnak it was carved upon each pillar, linking the laws of creation to the vault of the sky and the domain of the gods. Shafts of light from roof boxes illuminated specific concepts on philosophy and natural science. And since creation was the result of intended action expressed through nature gods, grand concepts were interpolated by number. Like an unfolding story, bundles of columns associated with specific creative processes were laid out so as to be lit by sunlight at allocated times of the year. Or at least that was the idea before pharaohs in later times recarved the pillars with their stories. One teaching survived the revisionism during Karnak's long and fluctuating history. It is a scene of a pharaoh sitting among an acacia tree under guidance from the god of wisdom. The connection between wisdom and the acacia is the powerful hallucinogen DMT produced by the tree, which, when consumed, induces a shamanic state. Under proper guidance and ritual, it allows a person to access specialized information. But it took until the late 20th century for science to discover that the temple itself is capable of generating a similar effect. Scientists at Princeton University, researching that fine line between science and mysticism, developed a device capable of measuring the local energy field with and without the influence of human intent. As one scientist walked in respectful silence around Karnak with a portable version of the machine, the energy emitted from this sacred place gave readings 6 times stronger than those compared to non-sacred locations, the highest ever measured. The experiment effectively demonstrated the power of place. However, the combination of focused group prayer in the temple created an expanded consciousness field that yielded even higher results. In other words, such places generate conditions that induce an elevated state of awareness. Add human consciousness and the field is amplified. Clearly, we are an integral part of this technology. In a manner of speaking, sacred places are self-help centers, illustrating a statement repeated throughout the ancient world, how temples were built to transform a person into a god, into a bright star. A processional avenue of Sphinx leads from Karnak to Luxor. Featuring the face of Amenhotep III, the pharaoh's bodhisattva smile induces a hypnotic effect, particularly after you walk past 2,000 of them. Luxor is an exercise in harmony, designed as it is on the proportions of nature and the human body, hence why people feel more attuned here. It is a wonder then why over the past 2,000 years, Luxor was allowed to fall into decay. Its connection to the Nile was gradually severed, and as the village sprouted within and around it, entering the site meant walking 50 feet down a hill of dirt. Much of the site was rebuilt by Amenhotep III, his son Akhenaten, and his son Tutankhamun. Yet by their time, Luxor was at least 3,000 years old, judging by the rubble used as a foundation and the realignment of the temple's axis, whose original surveyor's marks are etched into the pavement. In this respect, early Luxor and Karnak are linked. As the winter solstice sun shone into Karnak in 4400 BC, Luxor looked out to Vega, the bright star in the constellation of Lyra, the harp. The axis of Luxor was altered a 3rd time when another pharaoh added his fingerprint in the shape of a front pylon adorned with 6 colossal statues of himself. Ramesses II. And inside his courtyard too. Why have one statue when you can have 28? The new courtyard protects an earlier chapel of Amun, Mut and Khonsu, placed as it is on the original axis, making it the beginning of the proper temple. 2 massive statues of Amenhotep III, cut from single slabs of granite, flank the original entrance. Amenhotep was a kind of revolutionary. He began to remove the power of the centralized and corrupt priesthood of Amun, a task his son Akhenaten endeavored to complete, albeit unsuccessfully, which would lead to a coup and the murder of his son Tutankhamun, whose statue remains in Luxor to this day. Amenhotep's second achievement was the restoration of many sacred buildings. Behind his statue, he tells us who had his back on this project: the elegant Seshat, goddess of sacred buildings and measures, and her spouse Jehuti, god of wisdom, two original Aku Shemsuhor, who, according to the Edfu building texts, were the only divine beings who knew how the temples and sacred places were created, for they were the very creators of that knowledge. The building texts also refer to the temple as an insurance policy. Whoever shall make a copy of the vault of the sky and shall copy it upon the earth, it shall act as a magical protector for them in heaven and on earth, unfailingly and regularly and eternally. Essentially, the laws of nature were observed and hardwired into the fabric of each building to achieve a desired effect. So much so that a temple became the embodiment of a force of nature, a physical expression of a god. You could say the Princeton experiments validated this at Karnak, and Luxor too. But Luxor has another surprise up its sleeve. 7 vortices of energy spring from the earth along the spine of the temple. Their positions relative to specific sections that conform to the human body implies this was the pilgrimage route intended to stimulate the chakras of a person walking towards the altar. The root upwells from the ground in between the two statues. They lead to an elegant colonnade, originally set within an enclosed hall. One row of 7 papyri honors the Netta gods responsible for creation. The other, the 7 sages who brought the knowledge to Egypt. The sacral and solar plexus are activated here. To proceed along the journey of transformation, one must first open the heart. In Luxor, the pilgrim emerges into an expansive open court representing the unfolding of the heart chakra. This was a place of great festivity, where women dressed in white cotton dresses danced to the sound of lyres, a spectacle made more poignant when the constellation of the same name appeared along the axis of the temple. A section of 32 columns remind the visitor of the teachings prior to advancing towards the most sacred area. Equivalent to the choir in a cathedral, the whole of 8 columns represent the notes in the octave. Here, a person declared their intent using their throat chakra. Sadly, the Romans have left nothing except faded frescoes. In the next hall, frescoes of Tutankhamun remind the king of his divine origin, the support offered by the gods, and the lineage whose responsibility is his to uphold. In this hall of 4 columns, one for each of the 4 elements, a person reflected on their state of mindfulness. It is a room in which to find balance before entering the Holy of Holies. Behind gold-lined cedar doors, the visitor experienced the activation of the third eye. This particular sanctuary was rebuilt by one individual seeking illumination, Alexander the Great. The final stage of the spiritual quest was conducted in the place of unfolding, the hall of 12 columns, which occupies the position of the crown chakra. Each column is composed of 8 reeds, indicating the 4 material and invisible elements in perfect balance. But Egyptians recognized an 8th chakra, an energy field extending beyond the physical body that separates the spiritualized human from its ego. And the last chamber in Luxor was reserved for this mystical practice. The energy field of the soul is reflected in the impractical crown worn symbolically by pharaohs. However, it did have one practical use. It disguised the trait common to the lineage of the Aku Shemsu-Hor, their elongated skulls. The light of dawn bathes the compound of Enet Taneter, the house of the god. An undulating perimeter of mud brick defines the ocean of chaos from the sacred precinct within. Greeks of the 1st century BC found this joyful temple in a dilapidated state and rebuilt it. They left a note inside the crypt declaring how the work was performed according to the plan written during the times of the Aku Shemsu-Hor. And it was then renamed Dendera. Beneath the floor are reminders of the previous temple. Dendera is the house of Hathor, the consort of Horus. Depicted with the ears of a cow, she represents nature as a source of perpetual nourishment, so long as humans maintain a proper relationship with their environment. To remind them, a harvest festival was conducted every year. It began in the second hall with a statue of the goddess emerging dramatically out of the floor, which led a procession up a staircase to the roof, from where flowers were thrown to the crowd below. The walls of Dendera are covered in secret texts previously committed to memory. The priesthood foresaw the rise of fundamentalist religion and the end of the mystery schools, so in a desperate act of preservation, they posted the knowledge on every available surface. Paradoxically, it still takes an expert to decipher. Dendera also operated as a healing temple, drawing people from near and far to learn and practice magical and psychological therapies. The effigies in the first hall are somewhat misleading. They are, in fact, Roman emperors posing as divine beings making offerings to Egyptian deities. As for the important information in this impressive hall, it pays to stare at the ceiling. A model of the universe is presented. It is filled with calendrical details such as the phases of the moon, the course of the sun, stars and constellations, and the qualities of the gods, their responsibilities, and their association with the cosmos. Most importantly, it lists the sacred times essential for the proper function of the temple and the self. In one telling scene, the goddess of the sky oversees the creation of the zodiac. A burst of light from her vulva illuminates the age of Cancer, the period that roughly equates with the re-emergence of the Aku Shemsu-Hor and the rebuilding of civilization after the Ice Age. Ironically, Cancer rules agriculture, animal domestication and housing, all of which were in dire need of attention following a devastated landscape. The point is emphasized in the Chapel of Osiris. In this unique circular zodiac, the round disk of the sky is shown supported by 4 goddesses marking the solstices, and the 4 sets of hawk gods marking the poles and the equinox. Together, the 12 figures form the months, while the 24 hands mark the hours of the day. A ring of 36 figures marks the heliacal risings of 36 stars, one for each 10-degree segment of the 360-degree zodiac, whose houses are also depicted. The planets and 72 constellations expand in a spiral whose focal point is the crab, the age of Cancer once again. And although this masterpiece may have been carved in historical times, the original lies in a remote age, given that this map of the cosmos is centered on a calf leg depicting the Pleiades, the 7 stars synonymous with the 7 sages who form the nucleus of the Aku Shamsuhor. But not everything in this house of the goddess is designed to make you look up. There are also unusual things taking place below. Behind an incredibly awkward and narrow entrance, 2 crypts reveal the ongoing preoccupation with reaching the Amduat, a process that by the Greek era came to be known as incubation. Inside these claustrophobic, womb-like chambers, initiates left the body and returned. The process is outlined on the walls. Often presented as light bulbs or advanced technology, the mural actually depicts the blue lotus, the drug of choice in the ritual. Connected to a jed pillar, the plant's inherent energy rises from the bud in the form of a serpent contained within the halo or soul of the plant. The adjacent figures continue the story. The god of wisdom, in his other form as a baboon, cuts the cords of intellect so the soul can wander free in the Amduat. The hero returns in the form of Horus, assisted by the energy of the blue lotus, now depicted in the form of a solar boat to ferry the initiate on this journey across time and space. At the completion, Seker, the god of rebirth, honors Hathor, whose temple facilitated the experience back to the cosmic egg. Officially, these crypts are designated as storage rooms. Egypt's original capital is Menfer. It means established in harmony. It was once home to the divine architect Ptah, and kings and queens who lived in humble homes made of mud brick. Today, fragments of its greatness lie scattered among fields of palm trees, along with a humble statue of Ramesses II. On the plateau above, the god Seker makes his biggest splash in a 5-square-mile complex named after him, Saqqara. The name may also derive from Saker, to make perfect. And 5,000 years of architecture, along with tombs of Egyptian nobles and Greek philosophers, attest to generations who came here seeking precisely that. But Saqqara was not intended solely as a funerary complex. As we have discovered, there is physical death and metaphoric death. Pyramids such as those attributed to Semkemket and Teti, which were found sealed with nobody inside, are examples of this. And not forgetting the Pyramid of Unas, which illustrates the lengths to which people went to seek the Amduat while alive, because Unas himself is buried in the Valley of the Kings. To reach this pyramid required crossing the Nile towards the setting equinox sun, disembarking at a pier and walking along a half-mile-long umbilical tunnel leading to a series of subterranean preparatory rooms. When finally entering the pyramid, you came face to face with walls covered in the pyramid texts, the earliest sacred literature offering a unique window into a ritual connecting a living person with the Amduat. Like a veil separating two worlds, they are meticulously incised into semi-translucent walls of alabaster. 283 instructions offer detailed descriptions of the Amduat, how to get there, how to overcome negative forces, and the correct use of spells essential for the soul to maintain focus and find its way back. But above all, the pyramid texts implied they were intended for someone who was expected to return to a living body. As Unas himself declares, "I am the one who went and came back and shines anew in the east." The text closest to the sarcophagus reiterates this. "Unas, you have not departed dead, you have departed alive, to sit upon the throne of Osiris, your scepter in your hand, that you may give orders to the living." One section describes Unas's eating habits, which is very odd because a dead or dying person doesn't have an appetite. Unas eats their magic and ingests their spirits. Their big ones are for his morning meal. Their mid-sized ones are for his evening meal. Their little ones are for his nightly meal. The description refers to the initiate gradually ingesting a poison or powerful narcotic such as blue water lily prior to undertaking an out-of-body excursion. 2,000 years later, Western religion referred to this as the Last Supper. In another section, Unas undergoes a spiritual purification and rebirth to the repeated chorus of "Unas is not dead, Unas is not dead," preceded by the return to the pyramid. No other passage so encapsulates the central theme common to this esoteric tradition, that the soul is capable of temporarily disengaging from the physical body, journeying independently into the spirit world, and returning. But it is the massive stone box that speaks volumes. The deliberate choice of basalt, a rock that begins life in liquid form, epitomizes the transmutation between physical and ethereal states. While its black color, much in Egyptian, means to imagine, to discover, sums up the intent behind Unas's journey, one that will be repeated 1,000 years later by Thutmose III. To the modern eye, the colossal effort behind this complex seems over the top, and yet practitioners of this art gained a profound understanding of the universe as it is rather than how it appears. Take Rekhmire, the vizier during the reign of Thutmose III, a man cognizant of the mechanics of initiation, and of whom it was claimed, "There is nothing on earth, in heaven, or in any part of the Amduat in which he does not have knowledge." And judging by the title he was awarded, Master of Secrets concerning the unique seeing vision, the effort was worth it. All this takes place just beyond Saqqara's main compound, which is secluded from the mundane world by a perimeter wall that resembles a row of spirit doors. One doesn't just casually stroll into this sacred space. One must first undergo a purification. Or as the pyramid texts put it, learn to master oneself before entering the abode of the god. And the preparatory corridor into Saqqara is designed exactly for this purpose. 40 pillars formed by bundles of 17 reeds, each representing the way of the gods, mark the passage from the known into the unknown. The walk is all about mindfulness. Since the abode of the god mimics a state of balance, negative thoughts and emotions must be discarded beforehand so as not to pollute the delicate environment within. To achieve this, an alcove separating each pillar emits a positive or negative current. As these pass through the body, a person becomes conscious of imbalances and disposes any excess baggage they might be carrying. Reaching the end in a unified state, the person passes through a gateway in the shape of a T representing the breath of God and is ushered into the great court. One square mile of buildings enclosed within a perimeter in the ratio of the octave make this an imposing space. During the 13th year of the Pharaoh's reign, the court hosted the Hebset festival, in which the pharaoh was publicly disrobed down to a mere white apron to cover his modesty, whereupon he ran the perimeter twice, and if successful, he was declared reborn in heaven and deemed fit to govern for another term. That was the public stage of the festival. The ruler was then taken to the restricted Hebset court for a private ceremony. Each shrine contained a statue of a god representing an aspect of the mysteries, reminding the pharaoh of the teachings that were his duty to exemplify and uphold. Once the circuit was completed, he disappeared into a restricted chamber and reappeared 3 days later to be declared living. The focal point of Saqqara is the imposing step pyramid. Like an act of creation, it grew in stages from a small rectangular mastaba, whose creator remains unknown. The 5th and final stage is attributed to the architect Imhotep, whose positive contributions to society earn him the status of god. Officially, the pyramid was designed as the burial place of Pharaoh Dzoser. But since it incorporates 4 buildings far older than Dzoser, this theory is a non-starter. Inside a deep shaft, his alleged sarcophagus contained no hieroglyphs and no body. The adjacent tunnels, on the other hand, were lined with thousands of turquoise rectangles and packed with 33,000 alabaster jars and plates, many preceding the pharaoh's time. One wonders why robbers would steal a corpse and leave the valuables behind. More stone boxes lie throughout Saqqara in shafts sunk 120 feet into solid bedrock and connected to a warren of tunnels. Largely unexplored, this underground world is highly suggestive of people protecting objects of great value. Was Saqqara part of Jehuti's elaborate engineering plan to preserve the knowledge of the Aku Shemsuhor from destruction? The answer may lie 9 miles away, when the tunnels end in the place where we began this adventure. Ask anyone to share their initial feelings about each pyramid, and they'll give you different responses, despite the fact the buildings all look the same. But appearances can be deceptive, and indeed there are subtleties between each one. The impressions fall into distinct categories. The small pyramid has the intensity of people engaged in concentration or mental activity. The middle one feels grounded and practical, and lacks the spiritual element that only seems to occur in the Great Pyramid, the one singularly associated with shamanic experiences and the supernatural. It seems each building was designed to induce a different effect. The pyramid attributed to Menkaure bears a large gash, courtesy of Sultan al-Hasis Uthman, who embarked on a futile mission to dismantle all the pyramids. A second attempt was made in the 19th century by Colonel Howard Weiss, who delicately made his way through using gunpowder. The smooth upper limestone casing was looted, leaving the lower third of red granite to show the true age of the building. Deep, rounded cavities between the rocks attest to thousands of years of water exploiting the seams. Then, for reasons unknown, someone in recent times recarved a square section on each face, stripping away the erosion to reveal the stones in their original condition. Some feature the same enigmatic knobs found in the Assyrian. It is an unsolved riddle, particularly as this architectural detail is found in the Andes, even Taiwan. And what connects all of them are traditions of a group of pre-flood builder gods answering to the same physical description, mannerisms and purpose as the Aku Shemsuhor. If so, these sages were not unique to Egypt. They had an international maritime presence, a point strongly implied in the Edfu building texts. One characteristic of the interior is the extensive use of high-grade granite, particularly the monoliths used for the ceiling of the main chamber, which are carved as a barrel vault to relieve non-existent pressure from the ceiling above, because the chamber sits inside the bedrock. It is also a mystery as to how the blocks were maneuvered inside a confined space with virtually no room for maneuver. This particular granite is composed of feldspar, quartz and mica, making it an extremely hard material to work with under any circumstances. But it's the high content of mica that is of interest, a material generally used as an electrical insulator and capacitor. Was Menkaure ever connected with this pyramid? A delicately carved blue basalt box and its broken lid were found empty. In the adjacent chamber lay bits of bones and an anthropoid wooden coffin, allegedly bearing Menkaure's name, but it turned out to be a later Christian invention. While the true architect remains elusive, the pyramid does serve an important geodetic function. Stretch a cord from the far corner to the corner of the pyramid attributed to Khufu, extended 670 miles, and you reach one of the oldest monuments on Earth. Portasar, better known by its new Turkish name, Göbekli Tepe. Portasar is an Armenian site whose name means umbilical cord of Asar, the Egyptian name of Osiris. And like Osiris, Portasar is associated with Orion, marking as it does the first rising of its belt stars. And like Giza, the event is dated to 10,450 BC. Astronomy was the main activity for thousands of years in the nearby town of Haranu. Its astronomers were the Sabians, named after the Egyptian word for star. Described as the people of the book of the god of wisdom Jehuti, these white-robed mystics were still undertaking pilgrimage in the 14th century BC to the Giza Plateau to honor the source of their knowledge. Next door stands Khafre's pyramid. The only connection between the pyramid and the pharaoh are the statues found buried in the rubble of the Valley Temple 600 yards away. Rumor has it that the building began to be stripped by Ramesses II for a temple he commissioned for himself in nearby Yunu. So, if it was good enough for him, it was good enough for others to continue the plunder. The middle pyramid appears bigger due to its position on higher ground, as well as the remaining casing stones precariously balanced around the summit. It's a masterpiece of engineering. The bedrock at each corner was shaved until perfectly level. The center was then carved into steps into which the foundation blocks were locked. It is earthquake-proof and aligned to true north. Like the small pyramid, the lower courses were lined with granite. Its chambers are carved inside the bedrock, once again making the gabled ceiling in the main chamber structurally redundant. Unlike others, the box in the chamber is partially sunk into the floor. Made of solid granite, it measures 8.5 feet in length, ironically the height of the Aku Shemsu Hor as described in Karnak. And yet this entire underground world sits beneath the pyramid, which itself only begins above the bedrock, a mountain of stone that has yet to yield any hidden rooms. By contrast, the most explored and speculated building in the world is the pyramid attributed to Khufu. The Great Pyramid is a scale model of the Northern Hemisphere, its measurements an analogue of the planet upon which it stands. Even the number of stones around the perimeter mark the cycle of Sirius. It is a library of geodetic information designed for posterity and capable of surviving major disasters. In 2017, it was still revealing its secrets when experiments using muon radiography uncovered evidence of a large chamber. Below this cavity lies the Grand Gallery, a steep 157-foot-long granite hall with a corbelled ceiling that recedes in 7 steps. Since the Grand Gallery is said to be tuned to the period of rotation of the solar system around the galaxy, its measurements were transcribed into a set of frequencies akin to a music scale. When transposed to a keyboard, the sonic effect induces a kind of altered state of awareness, while each note tangibly interacts with various parts of the body. Perhaps this is one intended function. Seen with an esoteric eye, the Grand Gallery and its connecting rooms begin to make sense, beginning with a diagram in Thutmose III's chamber in the Valley of the Kings. The 4th hour from the Book of the Hidden Chamber describes the Great One who is in the Amduat, moving to the land of Rostal, the place of hauling. The place of hauling is an integral component in the act of rejuvenation, and it is illustrated as a series of sloping passages and doors resembling those of the Grand Gallery, right down to the megalithic granite plugs that form its roof. In ancient Egypt, rejuvenation was a lunar concept, and we see this represented by the connecting Queen's Chamber, a room made of limestone, a material created by the sedimentary action of water, which of course comes under the influence of the moon. Its complementary opposite is the King's Chamber, with its finely fitted and polished granite blocks, born of volcanic action, representative of the solar principle. Like the human heart, the chamber is placed to the left of the spine of the pyramid. The 9 blocks forming the ceiling reflect the esoteric number of perfection. The granite box is a scaled-down version of the room. All this makes for one of the most fine-tuned resonant chambers on the planet, where words are fragmented and sound becomes the main currency. Indeed, archaeoacoustic experiments reveal an average resonant frequency of 110 Hz, a frequency within a narrow range that shifts activity from the information processing left hemisphere of the brain to the right hemisphere and its capacity to induce sensing and altered states. The same frequency is produced in chambers from Malta to England and Ireland, places with long traditions of altered states and associations with gods. Could this austere room be the place where the seeker is transformed into an ark, a being radiant with inner illumination? Certainly it is one location on Giza Plateau where visions and out-of-body states are experienced. And viewed as a whole, the passages linking through the Great Pyramid follow an allegorical journey of elevation. Beginning in the rough stone chamber inside the bedrock, the space and quality improves as one ascends closer to the chamber made of the highest polished stone. The building, it seems, is a metaphor of the initiate reshaped from rough stone into polished diamond, into a god. Which leaves us with the connection between the three pyramids and the bell stars of Orion. Is it a mere visual interpretation of the sky, or is there a deeper meaning? The unlikely answer comes from Easter Island, where a tribe named Waitaha lived there 12,000 years ago and interacted with gods answering to the same physical description and doctrine as the Aku Shemsuhor, or as they were known throughout the Pacific, Urukeu and Shining Ones. Like their Egyptian counterparts, they too were associated with Orion. According to the three wisdom houses of Waitaha, each star is linked to a group of gods and their qualities. Star Mintaka represents the leaders, thinkers and planners. Its mirror is the pyramid of Menkaure, with its impression of people engaged in mental activity. Star Al-Nilam is for investigators, researchers and builders. Its mirror is the pyramid of Khafre and its impressions of practicality. And Star Al-Nitak, the knowledge keepers, shamans and dreamers. Its mirror is the pyramid of Khufu, with its unparalleled record of shamanic experiences. The Waitaha's unique tradition finally provides us with the purpose behind each monument. As to how the buildings were used, that recipe is lost to time. But to the few who've entered the king's chamber and left the body for parts unknown, the answer lies with something called sympathetic resonance. The Waitaha's direct interaction with the followers of Horus began in the same period when these traveling, seafaring gods were establishing the 8 sacred mounds along the Nile. And their experience is shared by 2 other ancient peoples, the Aymara of South America and the Maya. It's been said that the sign of an advanced civilization lies in its ability to communicate multiple levels of information through simple symbols. The same can be said of the monuments of ancient Egypt, designed as they are as multi-layered conduits of knowledge and function. Speaking through them, the Aku Shemsuhor laid a foundation for a rejuvenated ideal world, designed to last, like the soul, into eternity. The principle is conveyed in a simple symbol, the union of a T, the Tao, the breath of God, with the form of infinity, the eternal breath of creation, life everlasting. And their vision is a reminder that we are an expression of that breath, the very gods we've been searching for.